I'm Bob Murphy. I'm the chair of the Harbor Management Commission. I'm calling the meeting to order at 7:01 now. Roll call. We have 4 commissioners here, myself, Commissioner Conley, Commissioner Finzagera, and Commissioner Soden. We have a quorum. We did. The first item on the agenda is to review and potential action on the zoning referral for smoke on the water at the Dock and Dine, old Dock and Dine site. I don't know if anyone in the audience is here for that. Okay, because that application has been withdrawn. Okay, so we won't be talking about it or taking any action on that tonight. Second item on the agenda is an applicant presentation / discussion on potential ways to develop 91 Sheffield Street, including both water dependent and public access features. I did a little ad-libbing on there, but representing 91 Sheffield Street tonight is Mr. Michael Ott. Okay. And Keith Nielsen, who's not here presently, but I'm assuming he's on his way.
I've got my fingers crossed.
Okay, sounds great. This is going to be an informational meeting, general discussion. Commission won't be taking any action tonight on any of this, but this meeting was requested by Mr. Ott and Mr. Nielsen to again have a general discussion is the best way to say it, right? Would you like to elaborate on that at all?
Sure. Is it all right if I?
Yeah. Yes, sir.
This is informal.
It is informal.
Yeah, it is.
Yes, sir.
So just for your record, I'm Mike Ott. I'm a licensed professional engineer and land surveyor. And I'm at Summer Hill Civil Engineers in Madison. My office is on Wall Street in Madison. Luke, I don't know if you remember me from a long time ago. Yeah, a long time. I actually used to work with Chris. I used to be the town's consulting town engineer when I worked for Jacobson one time ago. When Chris first started, actually, it's been a real long time.
Do you,
Sorry. So that's how I know.
now, just formalities, I rattled off everyone's name. Do you know everybody by name, by face?
Besides
Luke?
No, I don't. No.
Like I said, I'm Bob Murphy and I'm the chair. Paul Connolly is our secretary, and this is Rob Soden. So if you need to address someone, I just thought it was kind to give you a shot at remembering the names.
Thank you. And thank you for doing this. And I apologize on it's unlike Keith to be late. And so I'm assuming our wires got crossed somehow and he's not going to attend. And he, unfortunately, luckily I brought something that he wrote. So, but he was really going to be the key to this. And I apologize. But I think I can do a pretty good job. Hopefully. So we had asked, just to have this informal discussion. There's no application pending. This has nothing to do with the appeal of the previous application. Chris and I talked about this, and we thought it might make sense if Keith and I came kind of low key, no applicant, no legal counsel, that kind of thing, and just talk to you guys. So Chris and I spent a couple hours going in her office one day a while ago, going through the land use department files for this property and trying to get an idea of the history of the parcel. And I should say that I apologize if I may say things that you guys already know, and I'm sure you have knowledge. You probably have knowledge, local knowledge about the parcel's history that I may not have. But we tried to do some homework to find out, see what we could find out about the history of this parcel, and that's why Chris and I spent some time. I came back today actually and go through the file again.
Do you think that this is Keith's phone number up here?
Say that again.
Do you think this is Keith's phone number up here? Because if I can allow him to talk.
Oh, I hope so.
Someone call me. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know, but I hope it's.
We have 2 people, right? we have two attendees by Zoom. There's one that's showing up with the last three digits of their phone number being 749. Could you identify yourself, please?
Looks like they're muted. Yeah. That's on you.
Want them to be allowed to talk. Just in case it was Keith.
Right.
Guess not.
Okay, that made it easier.
Scared them away.
And I should have known, I have Keith's phone, actually in my phone, so I couldn't check.
We try to call him?
We could, we must have got our wires, I'm sure it's my fault, we must have got our wires crossing out, because very unlike him to not be here. But I'll do the best I can, maybe may have to come back.
Yep.
If if there are more questions. So, so we didn't do, an exhaustive search on the history. We didn't go, for instance, to the town's historic society yet, although we can. But we talked to a lot of people who knew about the site, knew about when it was ocean surveys. You guys probably all know, in their operation. Keith goes back 30 plus years. With ocean surveys, he worked with them before. I never worked with them, but I know people who worked for them, two people. So what we found, what we think we found is that, or what I guess I should say, what we have not found any evidence that the site had been used historically for a water-based operation. I'm going to be careful about the term water dependent, because that has statutory, meaning under the Coastal Management Act and all that stuff. So I'll just use the term, water-based, just like common sense. Did you need the water? Did you access the site or via the water? Did you launch from the site to the water? And stop me if you guys know something I don't know, but the best we can tell, it doesn't appear that ocean surveys launched boats from the site into the waters or the other way around, best we can tell. And that, again, Keith goes back 30 plus years with them. We found there's no recorded surveys in the land records of the parcel. There's a 1945 survey in the land use department rather than the town clerk's office, but in the land use department file. It doesn't show any buildings or anything, but it shows the property boundary from Merritt Chalker, a local surveyor back then. So as early as 1945. There is in the land use department file, there is a 1970 zoning board of appeals application where a company called Ken Lab, and as best I can tell, it was the owner, I think, lived in Oline, that designed marine instruments. And I'm going by what we saw in the file here. Actually, if you Google them, you can still find them. You still find the company. They as early as 1970 either were occupying the site or wanted to go into the site, and they made an application to the town zoning board of appeals. And in their information, they indicate that there was at that time there was a residence on the site, and they seem to indicate that the owner of the land lived in a residence on that site. They also indicate that there was a building on the site that was a sail loft. There's a couple of documents that and chime in if you remember anything, but
you're doing a good job. I know.
There's a couple documents that indicate that there was a sail loft, and I actually don't know what a sail loft. I could guess, but I asked Keith, and what it was, and Keith said he explained it to me. And he said it wouldn't necessarily have been a use that would have had to access the water. A sail loft, I guess, can be anywhere. But there's also a 1965 document in the file that indicate it's actually a permit to construct a septic system, and it indicates that it was for residents and that it was the only the then owner of the property. So we know, based on the records, we think at least as early as 1965, somebody was living there. And that there was a former sail loft building on the site. There's also an indication in the town's files that in the 1970 application, that the sail loft was there at least 20 years prior. So that would have put it at 1950 or so. So that's the earliest we know about the site, I guess, is 1950, that there's indications that there was a sail loft on the site. And there's indication in 1965, somebody was living on the site. There was a residence there. Ken Lab did go onto the site. They may have been the predecessor of Ocean Surveys. I'm not sure when Ocean Surveys occupied the site. I think I saw something as early as 1979 that would indicate they were there as early as 1979, but I'm not sure exactly. They could have been there earlier. I think Ocean Surveys was the last occupant of the site. I guess, right? It's been, it's been empty since then. What else can I tell you? So Ken Lab, according to the paperwork we saw, designed marine, it says they designed marine instruments and other related products. So it doesn't seem like it was a manufacturing facility. It sounds like it was the design and maybe laboratories. When I Googled them, much to my surprise, you can still find them. And there's something about a gyroscope that they made. I'm not a boater, and I think it might have something to do with navigation, I'm guessing. That's what we know so far about the history of the site. Chris knows, if I could, a little bit about the history of the zone. Can you speak to that a little bit about how it got created?
So it appears that the property was marine commercial, or it was marine commercial, and I would say that would be probably back in the 70s, if not earlier. And at the time, it's a little bit unique because if you look at the zoning map, which we know is the last, zoning map, it's just one blue parcel surrounded by residential. So my guess is when they zoned it, probably because of the use, that it made sense at the time to zone it marine commercial. The marine commercial district a few years ago became the marine industrial district. And the reasoning at the time is that, as I'm sure you're aware, there are a lot of boating facilities, marinas, that the property is very valuable to purchase, make residential, and put private docks. And the zoning commission, looking at all of the marine commercial properties, went through and said, well, gee, we're Old Saybrook, where the Connecticut River meets the Sound, but look at how limited our areas are for marine commercial. And because they also allowed residential in the marine commercial zone, it made the property susceptible potentially to an affordable housing application. So, and we had seen that at one point with between the bridges. And if we lost a number of marinas and say Ferry Road became all residential with private docks, how is this Old Saybrook where the river meets the Sound? How do you protect the marine industry? And I think this commission and the zoning commission have been very particular about keeping marine commercial. So what they did is in 2017, they removed residential uses as permitted uses through all the marine commercial properties, made them into marine industrial. And at the time, the purpose was to protect our vulnerable marinas from becoming housing. And this was one of the parcels that's a little bit unique because it's split away from it. The property then went on the market, and the first contract purchaser came in and wanted to change the property into residential. Because if you look at the map, how it's all singled out, everything around the property is zoned residential. So the zoning commission had some preliminary discussions, and the neighbors were concerned because they said, well, if the zone changes to a residence A district, what's going to stop someone from trying to cram as many units into this parcel in the flood zone and go through and make it residential through some type of affordable housing or other type of an application? The applicant went through some discussions and then they backed out of the deal. So the next contract purchaser came in and bought the property, and he actually did look at the residential uses, and I explained the story about it. At the time, our town planner thought the only reasonable use would be residential because it was surrounded by residential, but we also explored some of the marine industrial uses and looked at the area, traffic, and so forth. And the marine industrial uses are a little bit unique because they allow for expansion of a single family, which is no longer allowed, open space, dock, wharf, slip basin, which, I mean, unless, and you're the expert, you came in and substantially dredged, what's the likelihood of having a marina there, a fish market for local catches, establishment for the sale, repair, and servicing of both, including dispensing of fuel and lubricants at retail, but expressly excluding both fuel storage. So again, that seems to talk about more of a waterfront use, a sail loft or ship chandlery, including retail sale of marine equipment, engines, boats. So, I mean, that could work. Then storage of boats when accessory and subordinate to a permitted use of a dock, wharf, or slip basin, or a establishment for the sale, repair, or servicing of boats. Under the special exception uses, which are also uses allowed, we again get into dock, wharf, slip, or similar landing facility for vessels engaged in commercial fishery, marine research laboratories for the study of aquatic and marine environment, ecology or resources, building of the town of Old Saybrook, a public utility station, telephone equipment building, provided there's no outside storage or service yard, a water supply reservoir, well tower, treatment or pump station, buildings of the state or the federal government, a railroad right-of-way passenger station, which we have no railroad, a retail store, a restaurant or other indoor food and beverage establishment, a business office, a swimming facility, commercially operated tennis court or tennis clubs, racquetball house. The base operation for fishery or shellfish business, including is an accessory use, a store or market for the sale of fish, shellfish, or other related products. So it seems that the history of this property really didn't have anything that was water dependent. And I mean, I don't know if you can go in there and dredge that much to make it water dependent. So I think we're kind of stuck unless there's some type of a regulation change or a restaurant. And it seems, or whoever purchases the property, unless they're going to have a sail loft or restaurant, or the town is going to put a park there, some of these uses are tricky for this parcel, but they may work in other marine industrial properties around town. So the reason that you first saw this is the text amendment. And that text amendment was crafted so that it didn't have a Residence A district, just flat out Residence A, and that was the applicant's idea to protect the neighbors so that they didn't have a housing, condominiums or whatever else, and the zoning commission had more control. And the reason it's referred to you, and I know typically you're reviewing applications on the water side, is that when the zoning commission amends their regulations, and I sent you just kind of your statute, that if the property is contiguous to the harbor or water, the zoning commission by state law has to send you a referral. And when you have that referral, if you deny the application, it puts the zoning commission into a supermajority vote, meaning they have to vote 4 out of 5 to pass it, where normally they could pass something out of 3 out of 5. So you have a lot of power, even though I know you regulate more on the water side. So I think part of the discussion that the applicant wanted to have a little bit, and correct me if I'm wrong, is how do you, what's the viewpoint of getting this dredge to make it a marine use? I mean, and I know Keith would
That's
be,
where Keith, and I have some info, luckily, but that's where Keith came in, was the connect.
and I'm not advocating one way or the other, we're just kind of stating, facts and.
Yeah, I'm interested to hear any exploration of the possibility of dredging.
I can kind of repeat what he said in writing here. So I just, so you know, the applicant, who's the contract purchaser, it is the same applicant that Chris mentioned that crafted the text amendment language so that a affordable housing development could not happen, basically in simple terms, on the site. And the same, and he's also the same contract purchaser that thought about a restaurant event space use, which, as you heard, is allowed by special exception permit or special permit. But in my understanding is in talking to the neighbors, the neighbors, wouldn't have been happy with that. And I personally think also, if you think about this site's, leave the water for a minute. If you think about where this site is and what Sheffield Street is like and the other uses on Sheffield Street and its connection to Main Street, a restaurant or an event facility at the end of that road would probably be problematic, or we were thinking. So I did the land part of the development, and all I did is a concept plan, which you may have seen. I've got it here with me. But Keith was hired by the applicant, the contract purchaser, to look at the water and the waterfront, and he, and I'll apologize for him not being here. I'm quite sure it's my fault, but we did a bunch of things. We had a wetland boundary delineated by a wetland scientist. We had the whole parcel survey, the property boundary survey, the wetland. There's a little pocket of inland wetland on the site also, in addition to the tidal wetlands. So, and we did land records research. We did quite a bit of background work as well as survey work to understand the parcel. Keith looked at the water portion of it. And so the parcel is uniquely shaped. It's kind of T-shaped, if you recall. And although it's about 10 acres, about half of it is tidal wet. Actually, if you want to pass this around, you can get a handle on what the parcel is like. So although it's 10 acres in size, about half of it is Title 11. There's only about 5 acres of upland, and a good portion of that is that narrow driveway that you see that comes in, which is about 600 feet or so from Sheffield Street. So it's an odd shaped parcel. You've got long narrow driveway, and it's also over about half of it is Title 11. And then when you add the 100-foot gateway conservation zone riparian buffer area, which is 100 feet from essentially the water, and you add the 50-foot tidal wetland setback that's in the zoning regulations, and you add the special flood hazard area zone limits, and all that is shown there. The reasonable area of the parcel that could be used for development becomes very small, quite small. So I had done that concept plan to go along with the text amendment application, just so your commission and the zoning commission could get an idea of what this contract purchaser was thinking. Keith looked at the water part, and what Keith says here, and maybe it would make sense just to read parts of this. But what Keith basically said is what I just said about the parcel and the tidal wetlands, and also that the water depths are Keith says, if you bear with me, I can, oh, here it is. If it's okay, I'll just read this. He wrote that the creek, which you can see on that, there's a bit of a creek that comes in from the cove to the site. And what he wrote here is the creek is clearly a limited waterway, unsuitable for motorboating, however, suitable for kayaking and canoeing. When the water depth is less than a foot, access may be impeded somewhat, depending on the types of ported vessels. But for the most part, this facility will provide access for kayaks and canoes with very little impedance except at dead low tide. What he meant by this facility is, in that master plan, we were proposing a public access dock. When you guys probably know this, I apologize if you do, but already, but when we go through the land use application process on a site like this, the state of Connecticut will ask that we provide coastal access, a requirement under the Coastal Management Act. So knowing that up front, we proposed a public dock, parking for the public. There would be easements. You have these situations elsewhere in town. Most shoreline municipalities do. So part of the proposal was to provide access for the public to the site and a dock, although, as Keith said, it would only be good for canoes and kayaks. And that's what he meant by, when I read this facility, he meant the public access dock portion of the proposal. So he goes on to talk about typical water-based uses. And he basically says that because of the shallow water depth, what he says here, I'll read this again. Access from the water requires reasonable water depth, which in this case does not exist close by. The mooring field, which I don't know which mooring field he's talking about, but you guys must know, has been dredged in the recent past, but it is more than a quarter of a mile away from this specific site. Dredging a 50-foot wide channel to a depth of 5 feet below mean low water would involve removing 10,000 cubic yards of mud over an area of 50,000 square feet or more. He goes on to talk about if open water disposal options for that dredged material were available. He says the price of this undertaking would be $4 million. He goes on to say if upland disposal is required because of unsuitability of the material, or unwillingness to authorize the placement of dredged marine silts in Long Island Sound, and that will, of course, would be the state, in the court. The upland disposal option will be on the order of 12 million. And then he says, this is really an important sentence, there is no known marine commercial activity that can support this type of startup financial burden. So he had hydrographic surveys done. That's how he figured out the water depth. I think you guys probably know him. I'm guessing you're familiar with Keith.
Yep.
And so it's basically his opinion that the particulars of this site, the fact that it's half tidal wetlands, shallow water depth, far away from deep water, the costs of dredging don't make it do those particulars make it a site that's not really set up for a water-based use. That's basically what his conclusion is. He could say this a lot better, of course, if he was here. And we may have to do this maybe again if you're willing and have him come back. And I can get you this actually. We can get you what you wrote. Actually, that may help you actually. This is actually a marked up copy. It's got some red on it. So we looked at the history, the former uses, how we have an idea how it became zoned. It was, I think, Chris, when we were looking at the timing of the zone designation to marine commercial makes sense with the timing of, the best we can tell, when a sail loft was there. And possibly when Ken Lab was there, the designer of marine instruments, and it makes sense. That's what a zoning, correct me if I'm wrong, that's what a zoning commission will do in trying to decide how to set zoning districts. They would look at least in part, they would look at the current uses of the land parcels. It's just like, for instance, this happens all the time, and I'm sure it exists here. I can't remember, but schools are oftentimes in residential zoning districts. So you look at the zoning regulations, and you can see that all the permitted uses are single-family residences, and then it'll say, an educational institution of the town, that kind of thing. Because that was there probably when zoning became effective. Do you know off the top of your head what the effective date of zoning is?
1948.
So in a lot of town, that's about like
47, 48.
47, 48. So in Madison, I used to be the town engineer in Madison. In Madison, it was 1953. So that's kind of a common, range. So I don't know when, for instance, the middle school was constructed. I'm not sure, but that, and same thing with the high school. Is the high school in a residential zoning district?
All our
Do you know?
schools are in residential
They are,
districts, the
yeah.
resident day districts.
Yeah, yeah.
And all our residential districts allow for schools, parks.
Yeah.
Playgrounds.
Yeah. So here's another example. I was looking just today at Waterford's regulations. I'm doing work for the Williams School, and the Williams School is in 2 residential zoning districts, but when you read through the residential, the permitted uses, you get to private educational institutions because it was there when they did their zoning. So or they added it later so that it would be permitted use. So I guess in a nutshell, we think so far, based on our research, that we know how it got zoned. We know a little bit about the uses, the history of the site, and we know the site is limited. Its shape, its size, it's 50% of it is tidal wetlands. The gateway riparian buffer area the 50-foot tidal wetland setback. We know the site's limited for the upland development, any upland development. And we know from the work that Keith did that I think what Keith is trying to say here is that the conditions are such that this is not a good site for a water-based use. We know how it got zoned that way, but all those things that Chris read, without, according to Keith, a tremendous financial input to get it going, just simply wouldn't work. So I think that's in a nutshell. That's kind of what we wanted to tell you. Keith would have done a better job on the water part. I'll get you this. We'll get you what Keith wrote. It's 4 or 5 pages. Any questions?
I can point out just one inconsistency that always bothers me is that there is a dock, private dock, not the public dock on this property. It seems, and if I recall the deep permit that Keith prepared, it was a pretty sizable boat. So that seems inconsistent to me. I mean, I can see the water depths like everybody else, and I admit it's shallow, but it just seems, you know, we keep on saying there's no water dependent use, but yet there's a private dock there. That's not jiving with me.
Yeah, and I've taken my motorboat in there more than once.
Yeah.
It's the easternmost area, the west that you show where the public dock was gonna be,
Right.
that's dry.
And maybe that's what he's talking. Maybe that's what he's talking.
So the eastern side, which is the private dock
Yeah.
that you were proposing, that's in navigable water.
Yeah.
And-
And I think there's the homes that are on Saltish Drive
Yes.
on the water side,
They all,
right? I think there's.
they have
there's
docks and
docks,
boats.
if I remember right. Yeah.
It's the same depth there as along the edge.
Is it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, is it a perfect site?
No,
Absolutely not.
no, I mean, it's like all the cove.
Just want to make sure, yeah, right. Everything outside
Yeah.
the dredged area is very shallow.
Yeah, and I'm not a voter and I don't know anything about, you know, the water depths or how big a boat can actually get in there, but obviously if you've done it and those other people have docks, I don't know what they have for boats, but so I guess that's really what we wanted to tell you. I just I don't know where this is going, but we wanted to make sure that you had as much all the information that we have, as much information as we can give you, because I think, tell me, correct me if I'm wrong, that ultimately someday in the future, you may see this again and may get referred to you again,
I
right?
suspect it will.
Yeah, clearly there's no, this is an informal discussion. There's nothing before the town right now, but it seems like it'll come back to you guys again at some point.
Okay.
So that's why we're here. Or that's why I was asked to come.
I for one appreciate the history
Yeah.
behind it. That was good to hear.
And we can do a little more. I think I'd like to go to the storage site and see if somebody has something on it. So again, the earliest we know is it appears in 1950, there was a sale up there and a residence. And maybe it was the same building. We don't know. But maybe we can do a little more hunting kind of and see what we can find out about the site.
I would be curious to see where he came up with the calculation of 10,000 cubic yards for a 5-foot channel, just, on the plans.
50 foot.
Yeah, he wrote,
5 foot deep.
5 foot deep,
I'm
50
sorry.
foot wide, yep.
yeah, he said 50, yeah, did I read that right? 50-foot
Foot
wide
wide.
channel to a depth of 5 feet below mean low water.
Yeah.
Would involve removing, I didn't check his map.
Yeah, I know, I'm just curious to see where he was bringing that channel to.
Yeah,
See if that-
yeah. He says in here, the mooring field has been dredged in the recent past, but it is more than a quarter mile away from this specific site. Does that make sense?
A quarter mile seems pretty far.
It probably is, because it depends where it's going. It could be going around the corner.
Yeah, if he's going to the shallow part, that's what I'm thinking.
So again, I'm sorry, he's not here.
No, that's all right.
Yeah, he's going to that western
He's talking about adding that western inlet.
Right.
Which is dry. You can
That's what
pull
I'll
into the eastern.
There's a lot of material in there.
Yeah.
That's a good question.
Sure, that's what I'm here for.
How it got to be marine industrial, is that relevant to us? I mean, it's there now. You know what I mean? I mean,
If you look, I mean, right in the Marine Industrial District, 3516 says a sail loft or ship chandlery. It looks like it was written for what it was being used for.
Yeah.
Like that.
And that's what I suspect, because we have this one, even though it's 10 acres, it's pretty wet. They really didn't use it for navigable water. And I think when the commission was making the map change back in the day, they were looking like, oh, that makes sense. There's 10 acres. Maybe that
yeah.
could be expanded upon, but it's really not. And I think now that between the wetlands laws, the coastal management act, there's a lot more barriers to developing it.
I just like to add to the discussion that the water dependent use is one use. There's other uses that are listed here that would be appropriate for and would not require dredging.
You know,
So
that's a very good point. We talked about that, and Chris and I talked about too. You're absolutely right. There's other uses that Chris listed that could be related to boating or marine use that wouldn't, for instance, a repair of boat engines, you wouldn't, I suppose, wouldn't necessarily have to access the water to have a business like that there. You know, there's definitely, that's it. I forgot about that. That's a very good point.
Outdoor storage.
Yeah, boat storage and yeah.
I just think the tricky part with that is going to be Sheffield Street.
And that's why, and I know that's not your, your focus, but that's why I brought that up earlier. You know, and I'm not advocating for my client. I'm saying this as a professional engineer and as a former town engineer. If you think about Sheffield Street and the school and the housing, is that senior housing that's on the left when you're going down, right? And, and the town hall and the Cade and, its connection to Main Street. That's why I mentioned all that earlier. It just seems like it would be, although it's allowed, it would be a unique place for a business to be on that site at the end of that street. The Saltish Drive subdivision, I can't remember the subdivision name, but that happened I think I was here when that happened, it was 04-ish, I think, right? That sounds about right. Yeah, and I can't remember, was that completely undeveloped? Was
I
there
think there might have
something,
been, there was one house on the end.
was there?
right.
So you got that residential subdivision there too. At the end of the street, and then of course, yacht club in the town dock and more condominiums there. I think there's a couple single family homes too. So this contract purchaser thought that single family homes would make sense on the site and the only way to get there, or the logical way to get there from a land use perspective, was the text amendment and a planned PRD, a planned residential development. So that's why he took the avenue he took. So I guess I'll stop just by saying it seems to us that although as I've forgotten your name already. Oh, Paul, I'm sorry, there's no way I said. There's a bunch of marine related uses that could go on that site. We don't think it's quite logical given its setting, where it's located, and its the site conditions, the size and shape, the half being tidal wetlands, that kind of thing, and the water constraints that he talks about. And I appreciate you guys taking the time. And I apologize again for not having Keith there.
It's I don't think anything you said, we didn't already have an opinion about. Okay. Who's gonna push a little bit on the dredging costs, but. You know.
That's because he's an engineer.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
But, I don't know if there's any other comments we can make. I just, we try to be very consistent, saying something either meets or doesn't meet the harbor management. Okay. And it's hard. I don't know what capable, we'll have to discuss this and just throwing this out there of saying, well, it doesn't meet the harbor management plan, but it's hard to meet the harbor management plan on this particular parcel. We make an exception. I don't know if we can. I don't know if we do that.
Yeah, I think we just state whether or not it meets the harbor management plan. That's our goal.
Right,
That's
zoning, because
zoning
is
and
just
just understanding that, we can put in that. I think it is a needle in a haystack kind of business that would be perfect for that site that is a marine use and it's tough, but when you look at it strictly from a harbor management plan perspective, we're just looking at it, monoculars, and I'm saying, does it meet this or not?
Right.
It's kind of how we have to.
in the ordinance that we have more shoreline than any other town, right? I think that's correct. And this is a sizable percentage of marine industrial land that's in existence.
And certainly the only undeveloped,
Yeah.
Is this
So,
I believe.
Yeah.
I said that. I don't know if that's true.
yeah.
Okay, but I can't think of one off the top of my,
I'm pretty sure you're right.
well, especially this large.
Right.
Now, there might be some little slivers here and there, but
Yeah.
this is, in that sense, it's some sort of an opportunity, don't know what that is. I would go ahead.
The question for Chris. So that first 35, 1.1 expansion of a single family dwelling, that's no longer allowed in my district, or is it?
No, it is. If
Okay.
the structure was there prior to the adoption of the regulation that eliminated single
Expansion
family.
of, but not,
Okay.
So
okay.
So because there was some mention that maybe there was a home there at one point, but
it appears that there was from what we found in the file. I mean, it almost looks like someone might have lived there and ran the sale law.
Yeah, that's kind of what it sounds like. Could have been one of the 4 buildings that's there, who knows? We don't know at this point.
And I think it's tricky too, because the zoning commission was purposeful about removing single family homes.
Right.
So if they had just left single family homes, then there could be an affordable housing development there because it was marine commercial.
Right.
But they did this to protect the marine properties from being purchased and becoming private homes and marinas. So it's a tricky site.
While we're here, I'm just gonna throw this out, and this is not well researched or whatever, but I was reading the harbor management plan and water dependent use, if I'm using the right term, is defined in the plan, and I think it's defined in the coastal.
Management.
Yeah, right. So you learn a little bit more as you go along, right? But one section of it says something to the effect of, even though it might not be a marine use, public access can be used to determine it was a marine use or something like that. So there's some wiggle room in there tied to public access. Maybe we should talk about that a little bit more. Not that I'm for this or against this, but in fairness, I was reading it quickly and I can't quote it correctly, but there is some, I'm going to use an inappropriate word, exception, okay, or wiggle room, whatever you want to say about something could be deemed, water dependent use depending on the degree of public access or something like that. And I think the example that was used is if you have a commercial building and you create a walkway around the water, right? It seems to be the, you know, that might offset, or that might be, now, you could say that is a water dependent use on that site. So that might be something, you know, that would benefit everyone, maybe. Something to think about, that's all.
And that's from the harbor management.
It's on harbor management,
I haven't
but I'm
read the
sure they
harbor
didn't make it up.
management planning, so
You know, yeah, it's 312 pages, so it's a tough read.
I got my three
That
zoning
explains
grades.
Yeah, I know that. Right, so. Just a thought, and we're talking about that,
Yeah,
frankly. I feel like I'm talking, I don't want you guys to say something too. We did appreciate in our letter to the zoning commission, we did recognize and appreciate that you guys provided public access. Okay. The value of that, I'm just speaking for me because we didn't discuss, the value of that particular access you proposed was, you know, to me, you know, we've already got the parking down at the middle school. I know that you're a little bit closer to the kayak, and we already have a, you know, kayak launch ramp down at Sheffield Street. So I mean,
Yeah,
going to the
absolutely.
same body of water. So I mean,
Yeah.
I don't think that entered in our decision or whatever, but
yeah.
if we're sitting here talking informally, that's something to consider.
Makes
Any other
total
proposal?
sense. So applicants are bound to create that public access unless, and correct me if I'm wrong, unless the commission, meaning the zoning commission, deems this site that kind of just doesn't make sense, right?
Coastal management.
Under the coastal management Act. So, you know, applicants often, we talked about that too, you know. You really have public access already, obviously very, very, very close by. But we're kind of, an applicant is kind of bound to provide that unless deep in their review, when the town refers it up to deep, they kind of say, maybe it doesn't make sense at this site, and the commission would have to.
That's rare. I
would have-
mean, deep.
Yeah, that would be rare. But the commission would have to say that too. Where did we, we went through this on 215 Elm Street. Remember, I remember like trying to explain why it kind of didn't make sense. It's a coastal site, but the site's frontage was literally a solid wall of 10-foot high phragmites and acres, and 16 acres going out to Mill Meadows Marsh, and it just really.
This is next to Pasta Vita.
Yeah, sorry.
The
yeah,
building's going to Subdivision.
yeah, just kind of, there's a good example where it just kind of did make sense. We did a good thing though. We gave an easement to the land trust, and the applicant is going to give some land to the land trust. Hopefully that will help in the restoration of Mill Meadows Marsh. Well, public access kind of didn't make sense. Coastal site where it did make sense. Good
Yeah, I want to be clear, I think public access on the site may make sense. I'm just saying, the one you proposed, you know,
To be improved.
bingo.
Wasn't really meaningful.
It was meaningful, don't get, that maybe is, you know, but.
I got you. I mean, I don't honestly, since we're talking, and this is informal, I don't know what else could be done there other than a walkway, I suppose, along the tidal wetland frontage, which is significant. It's on hundreds. You have to scale it, but I'm sure it's several hundred feet, I would imagine. There was, and I've forgotten about this, I think I have this straight. I think that there's a group of people, possibly the Sheltered Cove condominiums, may have been working on a phragmite control program. And
Friends
that's
of North Cove,
Friends of North Cove.
which
Yeah. And this applicant actually agreed to join into that to try to restore the frontage along this parcel. In fact, he had the wetland scientist do the required rare plant surveys as a start for that. So there's another thing that could be done. That this if this were to go through, someday, or I should say, if another application were to be made, that kind of thing could be offered also, the participation in the restoration of the marsh along the tidal wetlands along its frontage, and maybe a walkway might make sense in addition to the public access dock. I mean, it would be for viewing. I'm pretty sure from what I've seen, there's some pretty nice views there, especially if it was clear. If it was normal tidal wetland vegetation, rather than, you know, the tall fragmites at the fringe, there would be some nice views there. You can kind of see it if you go up into Coulter. Is it Coulter Park? On Coulter Street, the land. Foundry. If you go up there and look back at the site, you can see that if you sit up there and look back at this site. So that might be a way to make it more meaningful. Well, go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, I wanted to make sure nobody had another question while you were here. You know?
Oh, I'm good. Well, I appreciate the hour. Thank you. And I'll make sure I get this Keith's writing to Chris, to you guys.
Okay,
So,
sounds great.
all right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Glad you, I guess you have an early evening, since, it's
It's a bonus meeting.
hopefully the shower wasn't too bad.
No, it was great. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, thanks, guys. Thanks, Chris.
The members of the public here, do you want to ask if there's any comments? It's up to them.
Anybody want to say something?
Everybody have any comments?
We usually don't have visitors, so this.
They're
we don't
here
have
for
this.
this.
Yeah.
I'll just say I'm Red Costa and my wife Barbara, and together we submitted a letter this morning that was emailed to you.
Yeah.
And so, I think our concern is, one of the possibilities is open space there, Chris mentioned. And, there is some talk about trying to promote that as open space. I think what I've heard too is, the lawsuit that's pending on the property is blocking progress on that. But it's still an option that could be considered, I think. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to second that.
Okay.
Yeah. And there. Climate mitigation. Leaving those trees. Bird sanctuary. Educational opportunities for the middle school kids.
So all the arguments about ideal location for a business would be an ideal location for a park that access the middle street, the middle school, the park and rec, senior housing. And it is a special property, whether it's business or open space.
Yes. Okay. Well, thank you very much. And I'm not trying to cut you off.
It's all in what I emailed.
Yeah.
Well, the key consensus on the previous open space or water dependent access consideration.
Yep. Thank you. Yep. Well, the last item on our agenda, and I don't know how much we want to go through this or do this, but you're welcome to stay for it. You're welcome to get educated like us. But when we were, a little bit of background, when we were dealing with the attorney for the applicant, and there's no disrespect when I'm saying that, but she was talking like zoning, and we were down here trying to understand what she was saying, so I don't know how you can walk us through that. That's so unfair putting it that way, but simple questions like, well, does this document apply to that property? Well, I don't know. You know, those are some of the answers that were really throwing us a lot. And I don't know if you could, I don't know how to help us educate, or do we even need to be educated on the zoning process? Is that the right way to say it?
No, I was just thinking about we're not zoning.
Right.
You
Yeah,
know,
we're really only
But we seem to,
eyes.
but we seem to get wrapped up into it with some of the questions. I'm not going to use the word common sense because that sounds derogatory. Some of the questions we're asking just to try to get a grip on what we were looking at,
Yeah.
what we were being asked of. I felt like I was struggling a couple of times.
I think what happens is the applicants come in and they have a presentation that they try to adapt to the different commissions.
Yeah.
But that has a lot of material that's irrelevant to us. You know, that we really don't, you know, it's good maybe for us to understand, like you're saying, but it doesn't really impact our sole purpose, which is it consistent or not with the harbor management plan?
I mean, that's what
Kind
we
of
call
comes
that,
down
where
and
we
maybe,
feel comfortable.
you know, it's kind of zoning blind.
Right.
You know, it's really comes down to that. And it's easy to get sucked up into the bigger conversation. You know, we're citizen volunteers. You know, we're not.
So is it that the presentation was more, or some of the text amendment, I'll just speak in general, are more geared towards the zoning tool? So if it's an overlay district or a zone change or the text amendment, there's more focus on that with the applicants who are coming to you versus consistency with the plan, and it
Right.
muddies up.
I think that's what I'm thinking. As for me, I don't know if that's what you're saying. That's
Well,
kind of what.
I'll give you the example,
Yeah.
you know, frankly, is we had the text amendment for 91 Sheffield. Okay.
Yep.
And our charter does it meet the harbor management plan or not? So I even said it the wrong way because that was a basic question that couldn't be answered, or wasn't answered. Does this apply to this property solely, or does it apply more generally? Remember that?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Okay. Because they're two different answers. If that applied generally, and that's the letter we wrote you guys.
Yeah.
We don't have any comment to it because it doesn't apply to 91 Sheffield, or it may not. Okay. But if it does apply to 91 Sheffield, then she wouldn't answer that, if you recall.
Yeah.
Then it doesn't meet the harbor management plan. Right?
Yeah.
Go ahead, please, if you could help us.
I'll try, and Chris knows this, we purposely, Keith and I, we're gonna come along, as you know, no attorney.
No, I get that, and I'm not being
No,
derogatory,
no,
but I have to say it enough. You know, I don't want to be derogatory.
I agree with you, I totally agree, we actually talked about it on our side,
Mhm.
and I talked with Chris, and we thought just 2 engineers were gonna come. And we were just gonna talk like regular guys.
Yep.
Informal.
Yep.
And I watched, although I didn't attend, I watched one at least of your meetings,
Mhm.
as well as, the zoning commission meeting, and in my opinion, things weren't crystal clear, not only to you guys, but to the zoning commission. I'm sorry, the planning commission. I watched via Zoom members kind of struggling with what exactly was the applicant proposing. And it is a little bit confusing, but I do think, tell me if you disagree, Chris, I do think it would be good for you guys in your referral back to the zoning commission role, as well as the planning commission and their referral back to the zoning commission role, to have it should be explained to you exactly what they're proposing, so you have a basic understanding at least of what's being proposed. And I do think it was confusing, and I'm not trying to be negative to the attorney. She's a friend, and she's awesome. But I do think it was confusing. And if it does come back someday, maybe we should do a better job of, giving a basic overview of what's being proposed from a zoning perspective.
From a zoning perspective,
Yeah.
right?
And I think that, and you have very simple map amendments for going from residence to marine industrial or However, but sometimes when you start getting into village districts and overlay, it's like a cake, and there's times too that you can always continue something if you have questions, you know what I'm saying, that I could try to help guide you with, and maybe just, you know, even ask the applicant, because a lot of times what will happen, zoning can get really complicated and confusing, and you have someone who comes in and like, well, I'm gonna do a map amendment with a text amendment, and you're just kind of like, and I think we can try to, as much, you know, as I can, to try to help you if there's something in front, just call me, but Chris, what is going on?
But how much are we also like making a decision on that, or are we just looking at what's being proposed and its consistency with the harbor management plan? Like, how much are we? I don't know, if there's a map amendment or something coming our way, what's our referral back to the zone, like what zoning expectation coming out of the Harbor Management Commission when you guys send us something?
And I see where you're going. It's a little tricky because we're sending you a referral about something on the land.
Yeah.
But you're regulating the water, but you also have power, and that you can say no, and it makes an application a supermajority vote.
Right.
So, I mean, I think, you know, concerns, suggestions, you know, the coastal access is inadequate, or we think there's an opportunity, and I think it also can try to help the applicant to give some guidance, you know, as well as the zoning commission. But each application and each, they're so unique, in every parcel, it gets, unless it's an overall change, when we're changing the text for an entire zoning district. But I mean, for tax, but we also, or I send you referrals, because there's a lot of times that, you know, for example, smoke on the water, there's the potential of transient docks. There's a potential, and these are things that you're the experts and you manage, where the zoning commission's like, I don't know how much water's out there. I don't necessarily know. So it's like, why are you getting this? But it may be something, if it's a special exception permit, I'll say, maybe harbor manager wants to weigh in, maybe you don't want. I mean, you don't have to for the special permits and things like that, but I think with, and smoke on the water withdrew today, but you have transient docks, you have coastal walkways, you have seawalls. I mean, you have a number of things that people will come up and offer coastal access or transient docks, and you might go, that's the worst area ever. Or, gee, you know, why did they move it over 30 feet? Because then you get an approval. So that's my way of saying, and the zoning commission saying, this is coming through. Do you want to get your comments in now? Because they're going to say, gee, can you manage this?
It's funny because when you start talking about that too, at least in my world, where we sit there and go, you got to move this 30 feet. Not necessarily in the zoning application, it would be in the deed permit.
Right.
You know what I mean? So, and you guys don't even see that part of it. You know what I mean? But we have those coming for new structures anyway. And that's where we would kind of get into more of the water bound details. Okay, not on the zoning. You agree with that, Rob?
Yeah.
And I think for something that's just like a courtesy referral, it's an opportunity for you to say, there's no way we would allow this, because you're not into the details, but it's kind of like, hey, this is going on. And it's more of a preliminary way for you, number one, to know what's happening, and to see, you know, if there's some red flag that you say, all right, before you get this all through zoning, you're going to have to shift the dock, which means you have to shift the parking, which you, so that's part of the reason.
We welcome anything you send us.
Yeah, we do.
Gas station's a big Y, whatever it is.
Why would you get that?
No, but I mean that, sincerely, I mean that, you know, so I don't want any, the questions we're asking, you know, to be construed as, don't send you what, keep sending us everything. We try to act on it quickly.
And it
Just
could
so
be
we're not
something
holding you
that's a
up.
text amendment that maybe it's not necessarily on the water. but
It could-
for that location, but maybe another location
Yeah,
that
yeah,
you're
yeah,
thinking of, so I try to
Yeah.
cover the base.
No,
All the bases, and
Yeah.
just say, well, gee, that'll apply here, but hey, we never thought about it applying.
Right.
So we're a little,
no, please keep on saying.
and you're all welcome, I mean, if you have a question, just call. Say, I don't understand this, or why, you know, why are we seeing this, or, you know.
Good night.
Okay.
See,
And sometimes too, and we were talking a little bit about coastal access. I mean, we have coastal access that we've pushed for over the years, and some of them are falling apart because it's okay, are you really gonna, like our new Dunkin' Donuts, there's coastal access in the back. How many people know you can go back there and sit and have a view?
Where?
Behind the new Dunkin' Donuts in Agway,
When you're in the drive-through lane, you can see the bench.
There's a marsh back there, yeah.
and you can see, and I mean, it's got a beautiful view.
So just down here tire, by the way.
But I mean,
Spend more time there.
and there's, and I mean, deep, would everyone push for
Yeah.
the coastal access, but sometimes, I mean, there's opportunities you could see something and, you know, here's a way to make it better. And sometimes it's great to have, you know, lots of coastal access and benches. It's just trying
Yeah.
to be more purposeful in finding things that people really use.
Right.
And we've had residential subdivisions with beautiful walkways and benches, and other than the neighbor who walks their dog, people really aren't using it. And I think
Right.
we can improve on that and work together.
Are those public access points on our GIS system?
We do have, we have a coastal access, we have a manual, or I can email it to you. I forget, it's been a little while.
Yeah. And I wonder if we should do like signage or something, you know,
They do have signage,
postal access there.
but neighbors a lot of times get upset about it. It's kind of the standard deep coastal access signs.
The brown sign.
Brown
Yeah,
one.
yeah. There's one on North Cove Road down at the, you know, far end where you turn up to Cromwell.
yeah,
There's not one for behind Dunkin' Donuts, or is there? They haven't seen it.
I'm
I
gonna
guess
go there
we-
tomorrow. Have some coffee.
Same thing.
Head on out there.
Spend too much time at the dollar store. I should have gone right over back there. before you can-
Okay. So I think like, yeah, when we have one of these, it's really complicated. Like this one is involved and smoke on the water, you know, I know they withdrew, but that's a complicated one as well.
Mhm.
Obviously, we may need your support.
Yeah.
For part of the discussion, we try to keep it, and we learn by the specific application, you know, rather than looking for a primer. Which can be hard to do. It's like asking us to do a primer on the harbor management plan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again, Michael, and thanks, Chris.
Anytime.
Thank you. Thank you, public.
It was helpful. Thank you. Thanks for taking the time to come in.
I see my.
I'm gonna make a motion to adjourn.
Thanks, Chris.
I'll second it.
Thank
Discussion,
you, your man.
Oh,
hearing no discussion, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Aye.
Thank you.